各位雋悅工作室嘅朋友，我係梁永準 Philip Leung 今日呢個活動嘅 Moderator。我哋開始之前咧，今日係6月2023年6月10號啦，朝頭早10點。咁我哋開始之前咧，我想請我哋嘅雋悅工作室嘅主席Lai See同大家介紹一下雋悅工作室係幾時開始啊，同埋係乜嘢嚟嘅？Lucy， 請。
多謝 Philip。Thank you. Thank you for coming. And then I'm so glad that we are able to have, this is the 4th non-Chinese speaking Zoom and physical meeting that we have since we established. And it was actually back in here, in this very room. Then some of us, this essay is 7 years old. And then about 6 years ago, some of us here, then what we call the term is we blow water. And then we talk about various things. And then it comes to us that maybe we can, with some of our expertise, our experiences, we are able to crank out some good ideas for ourselves and for Hong Kong. So that is how we started. And we have been quite hardworking during the COVID. We still have our weekly Zoom meeting, almost weekly. When I look back, it's almost incredible. So we have been hosting now is about 100 Zoom meetings, and that is just a few years' time. So, and you are the 4th one. You are the 4th one after Alan Simon, after Chandra Nail, after we have a German friend, Mr. Ronhot, who talk about the German education system. So now that we have this is very special. I'd like Philip to go further introducing you. But what we are hoping that with our continuous effort, we are able to cover, do good for ourselves, do good for the society, generate some positive energy. And in particular, some of us has been working like small groups, have been like some of the people around here. We've been working on some of the issues on housing and land in Hong Kong. And we have been also looking into some of the how to do social listening through social media is one of our projects too. So we have other things ongoing, small projects, and hopefully it is a forum for all of us to exchange and feel good, do good. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman Lucy. So this Tannehill workshop group was actually created several years ago by very enthused people such as Lucy Kwan, the current chairman, and Lawrence Zheng, the founding chairman. Also, the weekly meetings are managed by several people, including my good friend W.S. Chan and Lai See, as well as Anthony. So what I'd like to do is for people to understand Nury, the person, a little bit before we plunge headlong into your presentation today. So Nury, I've known you since what, 20, 30 years ago. I haven't really known you, but I've known your columns. So I'd like you to tell us how you transformed from being a humor columnist. I read your Lai See, by the way, with a lot of joy, and then you're like a chameleon. You transformed from there to Far Eastern Economic Review, when you wrote columns there as well, and then you wrote children's books. I read one of your children's books on relativity and quantum physics and so on, up my alley. So how did you make that transformation? Can you tell us about it?
Well, I think in some ways, the old school model of journalism is dying. The newspapers are dying. And for that reason, I think a lot of journalists are finding new avenues, and book writing is where a lot of journalists go. So I started writing books about 20 years ago. Already in the 1990s, you could see that journalism, the newspaper model was dying. And at that time, I was quite sad about it. Now I'm quite happy about it because we recognize that the old school media, the international media especially, create problems. They create more problems than they solve. And I think it was Julian Assange who said this. He said, you know, perhaps countries are better without the free press. And when he said that, a lot of journalists were very shocked, including me. But now I think about the trouble that the media has stirred up. I think maybe Julian Assange was right. So I moved towards books. And then I evolved again in 2019 when a lot of Hong Kong people came to me and said, international media, what they're writing about Hong Kong is just not the truth. And often it's the opposite of the truth. And at first I resisted.
That was a very good case in point. And in the recent years, we actually see a lot of populist politicians leveraging on dirty media, and they give us partial truths, fake news, and so on. So when did this actually begin? When did we start to not to be able to respect the traditional media?
You know, I think the media has always been a little bit corrupt, a little bit stupid, really, a little bit lazy. All these things together causes problems. Like, I mean, I'll give you an example. My father worked for media in the 1960s and later discovered that his boss was a CIA agent. And that's why he was censoring certain stories and pushing other stories. That was in the 1960s.
Wow.
1970s, there was a big scandal in America when it was discovered that the New York Times and other Washington Post were printing CIA made up news. That was 1970s. So from that day to today, I mean, there was one guy. Do you remember a magazine called Asia Magazine in the 1990s?
I remember.
Yeah, it was published. It was a supplement to all the different Asian papers. And we always had trouble. I worked for that group. We always had trouble with the Tokyo correspondent. He was always too busy to do his job. And eventually he opened up, he said, I'm not really a journalist. I work for the CIA, guys. That's my main job. He owned up to it. And he said, look, find a real journalist. And he quit. And we just thought, what? And so that was in Hong Kong in the 1990s. So you can see that the Western hostile intelligence has always been involved in journalism.
So it's not just recent times, it dated back a long time. Yeah. How did you create Friday Every Day, by the way?
Friday Every Day I was getting very frustrated with the traditional media, especially even in Hong Kong. They were not printing the truth. And RTHK, I used to
recording in progress.
It was just awful. And there's a guy called Herman Hu. He finances a lot of the sports and culture stuff. He's a businessman, and he was also very frustrated by all this. And he realized that on Friday nights, people would go for a drink with their friends and talk honestly in a good-humored way. So he said, let's start a media that doesn't fight. Instead of fighting, you know, America's right, China's right, or whatever, let's start a media that talks in a light-hearted, funny way. And so he and I got together and started FridayEveryday.com, which battles the false news, but with a light way, with cartoons, funny essays, and memes, and funny videos and things like that.
That's really nice. A lot of people who are here today, including those that are here in person and those that are logged on online, they read your Friday Every Day.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So I would like you to now go straight into your presentation, if you don't mind. And we're going to record this. So I hope that won't make you talk too careful.
No,
but we record it mainly to distribute it among the Tannehill workshop people.
Right. Well, nothing I ever say is off the record. So that's my life is on the record. So if you want to share anything I say with anybody else,
okay,
absolutely fine. Yeah. Oh, sorry, just
yeah.
Okay, so I love Hong Kong just like you love Hong Kong. Hong Kong's such a unique and it's a crazy place. I mean, Hong Kong's the only place in the world where your right? So it's the only place where the security guard building is like 8 times the age of your building. So Hong Kong's a wonderful, crazy place, but there's a very different image of Hong Kong around the world. And
excuse me, I'd like you to sit.
Yeah, and we need to deal with this new image that's been created. And can I ask you to operate the share screen and put the slide on? You know, there's a different image of Hong Kong which has been created, and this is it's the
mouse if you want the mouse.
Yeah. So next slide. Okay, so sometimes I try and fix the image of Hong Kong. Sometimes I just play along with it. So for example, here's a social media post. I live in Hong Kong and the oppression is unbelievable. You know, my pandas are dead and there's no gasoline left for the rickshaws. Pray for Hong Kong. You know, and I put up something like this on social media, and you know what? A lot of people know me and they know I'm joking, but a significant number of people believe that this describes Hong Kong today. And this gets shared around the world. This guy in Hong Kong, his pandas are dead. He can't even feed his own pandas, you know, and the Hong Kong people can't drive their rickshaws anymore. Oh, this is so terrible. That's the image of Hong Kong around the world. And it's shocking and evil, but this has been created. So what has caused this? You know, now this is a, you know, it's just so ridiculous. It's funny, but there's a serious side to this. I want to show you this. Okay, so I wonder if I can get rid of this top bit. I'm missing something. Apparently not. Okay. Hong Kong is shipping protesters en masse to China. And then this bit up here says that this is a bus taking Hong Kong protesters to across the mainland where they will be disappeared. And Hong Kong protests murder, kidnappings, Asia's disappearing activists. Now, some of these are big newspapers, big media publications. So you can see there's a very serious problem here. And it's not just internet. The Daily Telegraph, and it's not just in those days. Daily Telegraph just a few weeks ago wrote about the authorities killing 15 protesters. The Daily Mail had the same story. None of it was true, but these are big international media spreading these false stories. So we've got a problem here with the media. They're not doing their job. They're creating this false image. So, you know, I'm not a political expert, and I don't want to go into all the politics, but I do know the media. So I'm going to share with you some tricks that we the media do to mislead the world. The things we don't want the world to know, right? And here's one of them. Okay, so this is a picture from the protest. Now, in 2019, I was at a protest march, summer of 2019, and a series of really strange things happened. The first thing was there was a big march up Garden Road to the US consulate, and it was calling on President Trump to come and fix our problems. Now, I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, Hong Kong people had the world's highest IQ. World's highest IQ measured. They are not stupid enough to think Donald Trump can solve our problems. Donald Trump can't solve his own problems. Donald Trump can't run a business. Donald Trump is probably the worst person in the world to ask to solve your problems. Why are they asking Donald Trump to come to Hong Kong to solve these problems? Now, it's clearly this was artificial. They're calling on Donald Trump to create problems because the Chinese won't like that. Now, the Chinese in Beijing, I'm meaning. Now, then the protesters, they came up with some paper and they said, we have made an English translation for the international media of our request, our letter to Donald Trump. And you know what? It was clearly not, well, we all know the difference between Chinese translated into English and English translated into Chinese. We can tell immediately, right? And this is what it said. In desperation, Donald Trump, we seek your engagement and assistance to fight back against this authoritarian regime. And the whole letter was like, okay, this is written by English speakers. It's not written by Chinese speakers. Absolutely not. And then they come out with all the banners, and all the banners say, defend our constitution in different ways. Now, I'm thinking, Hong Kong doesn't have a constitution. The nearest thing is the basic law, and the protesters hate it. No real protester would have a banner saying, defend our constitution. But there were literally hundreds of people holding banners which said in different forms, defend our constitution. So myself and the other Hong Kong reporters there were looking at this and saying, this whole protest is fake. It's just fake. Whoever is setting this up doesn't know Hong Kong, hasn't done their homework, doesn't do their research. It's just flown in, said, defend our constitution. That sounds right. Let's put it out there. Printed all these banners and off they went. Now, the problem here was that the international media, of course, were just taken in by this. They don't do their homework either. Defend our constitution sounds all right. People calling for Donald Trump's help sounds all right. So, of course, they print Hong Kong people are calling on the US to help them. They want their constitution saved. So there we get problems. The next problem was the exaggeration factor. Now, you probably all know this. So that particular protest was reported as 1,500 people outside the consulate. Now, I have a special trick for getting the number of protesters in any march. I call it counting with my finger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. There were 476 people. Right? Every media printed 1,500. I soon found out 300% exaggeration was the minimum. The bigger marches, it was between six times and 10 times. So there was no, and I talked to professionals in the crowd estimation business about this and wrote a whole chapter of this book on that topic if you're interested. But number two, we don't want the media to know we the media don't want the public to know what's behind all this. Now I want to show you something. Okay, now the top row here are the banners used at the US Capitol Hill protest in 2006. The bottom row are the Hong Kong protest banners. Look at the typeface. Look at the exact shade of blue. Look at the colors, red, white, blue. Look at the design. Now, it's absolutely unmistakable that the same group designed both sets of banners. Now, I've done investigations in other places, including a big protest in Japan. If it's an anti-China type thing, they often use this set of typefaces. So the Hong Kong protests were American. They were American. There's no doubt about it. Now, will any media print this? Answer, no, none of them. The international media won't touch this because it's true and obviously true. Now, the problem is the local media won't either. South China Morning Post, absolutely useless. The Hong Kong Standard, Singtao, they're a bit better, but still a bit scared of politics. So we, the media, don't want you to know the connections that the US is behind all this. Another thing we don't want you to know, the good guys are not the good guys. Let me give you one example of that. One day in 2019, I was in Causeway Bay, and there was a big protest going on, and all the protesters were saying, holding up their banners and saying, photograph us, photograph us. And we were obediently photographing them, and they were posing in various ways. And of course, they got out the old lady, Grandma Wong, and they got out the young people who looked very pretty. And then the leader called them over, and he said, look, not enough trouble. We need to cause more trouble. So orders went out, all cameras down, all cameras down. And then they started ripping up the fences, lighting fires, causing trouble. So, of course, I was there taking pictures of everything. So I was taking pictures of them, ripping stuff up, lighting fires, and so on. They try to hide things behind the umbrellas. But I thought, look, you've got to be honest as a journalist. You've got to cover the whole thing. You can't let the protesters tell you when to put your camera down. Eventually, they saw me and they said, that guy's still filming. And they surrounded me. And, they called out the big guys dressed in black. And they grabbed my phone. They said, delete all your pictures. So I deleted all my pictures. And then they let me go. And then, I stepped away and I pressed recently deleted. Then I pressed recover all. And then I went to the newspaper and said, here are some pictures from today's protest. So I thought I was being very clever then, but I did something rather stupid afterwards. I then wrote in my column what I'd done. And of course, the number of death threats I got from then on went up by 100%. But yeah, I tell you that story, not to show how brave or stupid I was, but to show you that the rest of the media did put their cameras down, which is not good. One of the ways we can prove that the protests were organized is to simply look at other protests and see them using the same secret book. So here is an example. Okay, so these are the media pictures shared by the protests in Hong Kong on the left and the protests in Thailand on the right. So on the left, you can see in Hong Kong, kneeling person in front of wall of police officers. That's a standard picture that they always organize and use. There's always a picture of a brave young man. Here's young Mr. Wong on the left. And then on the Thailand picture, we've got, I'll just point to him here. This is a guy called Penguin, who was chosen to be the Joshua Wong of Thailand. There's always a hand signal. So this is the Hong Kong hand signal, 5 demands, not one less. And here's the Thailand hand signal, which was 3 fingers. And both were financed by the same, well, I've got NED here, Ned, but in fact, there were multiple groups and Ned was just one of them. So, and I could make this graphic, I could put in other protests too, because they use the same book for each of the protests. Okay, so we don't want you, the public, to know about this. The other thing we don't want you to know is about the money. Okay, so first, the US told Hong Kong people they weren't interfering at all, and all the media printed, no, they're not interfering at all. And then number 2, we found the NED money, and there was loads of it. These figures here are just for 1 year, and that's just one fund out of multiple funds. Then a leak in the US revealed another secret fund, and then we found several Hong Kong bank accounts. In fact, there are huge sums of money coming in from the US to fund anti-government activities. We also found we managed to track down the accounts of a group called Stand With Hong Kong. You may have heard of them. And we found they were in pounds sterling. So organized by London, clearly. So another thing we the media don't want you to know. A third thing we the media don't want you to know is about the civic groups in Hong Kong. Now, there's been lots of scandals recently about Hong Kong authorities closing down groups like the Confederation of Trade Unions, for example. Now, I want to take you back to 1993, 94, when the Confederation of Trade Unions was formed and announced. And reporters, this is 30 years ago, I was a young man then, we went along and said, oh, a new federation formed. Okay, write it down. And some of us asked the question, why do we need a new Confederation of Trade Industries? There's already a Federation of Trade Industries. We've had it since 1948. And it's fine. It does all the collective bargaining, all the stuff that trade unions do. And then the announcement was, well, that's a fake trade union thing. That's a pro-Beijing body. We are the real ones. They're political, we're real. They kept saying that. They're political, we're real. Of course, the truth was the exact opposite. Later, we found the NED accounts, and the NED accounts clearly said that the funds were given to the Confederation of Trade Unions every year to act as a pro-democracy group. In other words, to be political. The Federation of Trade Unions, what did they do? They did collective bargaining, workers' rights. They did what trade unions are supposed to do. But look at the media. You can do this yourself. Go on Google and look up the old SCMP files. And what do they say? Every mention of the real trade union groups has brackets, pro-Beijing group. Every mention of the Confederation of Trade Unions presents it as a real group. In fact, the opposite was true. Confederation of Trade Unions was a US-funded body to act politically, and the Federation of Trade Unions, the original one, was a real trade union organization. Okay, and that's just one example, but there are many other examples. Hong Kong Human Rights Monitor is another example. This is a co-organized group by the US intelligence and Hong Kong barristers, senior Hong Kong barristers. They co-founded this group. So I could go into detail about that, but I won't. I wanted to take you to another historical example. You may recognize this plane, some of you know your Hong Kong history. We, the media, don't want you to know that the interference in Hong Kong from the West can be very dangerous indeed. 1955, this picture, Kai Tak Airport. A plane was taking off from Kai Tak Airport to deliver people to a conference in Bandung, Indonesia. And who was supposed to be on this plane? Yeah, the leader of China, among other people. And a bomb was placed on the plane. It blew up over the sea, and 16 people were killed. No one was ever charged, no repercussions. We now know, of course, exactly who did it. The US organized the bomb, and a Taiwanese and a Hong Kong man was paid to put the bomb on the plane and then fly to escape to Taiwan. We know it's the US, we know it was Taiwan. But has there ever been any repercussions? What about the 16 murdered people? Nobody cares. Nobody cares. The newspapers will not bring up this incident because we know who the guilty parties are, and the journalism sector works for Taiwan. It works for the US, not interested in the truth. Okay, that's number 4. Number 5, we the media don't want you to know how deeply Western agents dominate journalism. I mentioned to Philip earlier that my father found out in 1966 he was working for the CIA as a journalist. His boss was a CIA man. There were so many examples of this. Some of you may have heard the name Radio Free Asia. Have you heard that? So Radio Free Asia sounds like it's an Asian group working for free press. It's based in Washington, D.C. And one of their first assignments, was way back in the 1950s, was to get was to rile up trouble among Chinese mainlanders. And they did this by starting a broadcast operation, Radio Free Asia, which would broadcast the news that the Chinese leaders were evil, the US leaders were good. But then research found that Chinese people didn't have radios. So they attached radios to balloons. They sealed the tuning knob so that it could only take one channel. And they launched them from Taiwan across the Taiwan Strait. Anyway, hundreds of these balloons went towards China, but God was on the side of the good guys. A wind appeared, blew them all back to Taiwan. And that program was abandoned. Radio Free Asia still exists today, and it still does exactly the same thing. Could give an example of Radio Free Asia news. A source told RFA that Chinese authorities forced Uyghurs to celebrate the Muslim holiday. So they're forcing the Uyghurs to do what they want to do. Okay, now how stupid is that, right? And look at the reply from somebody on the internet. How dumb do you think we are? Okay, this person just represents the ordinary people of the world. RFA is trying to trick people absurdly. Now, this is a funny example because it's just ridiculous. In fact, I got film of the holiday one year and then film of the holiday next year when they're supposedly forced to do their dance outside the temple, and they're identical, you know. But RFA is dangerous. RFA was one of the main people behind the millions of Uyghurs locked up in a Xinjiang story. So completely fake organization pushing fake news, but quoted by the New York Times, quoted by multiple different sources, quoted by people in Hong Kong. Okay, it's another thing we, the media, don't want you to know. We, the media, don't want you to know that we don't correct mistakes. Now, I'll give you a very shocking example of this. 1989, Tiananmen Square, June the 3rd night. Two stories appeared the next day about what happened in Tiananmen Square. One said that soldiers used machine guns to kill students in the square. The other said nobody died in Tiananmen Square. There was some fighting in an area called Mushi Di, 4.5 kilometers away from the square, where a couple of hundred people died, mostly workers and soldiers, not students. So two completely separate stories were issued. Now, over the years, all serious people, all serious historians have come to the second story, but the media still pushes the first story. Now, here is a text revealed by Julian Assange, and it's a secret file from the consulates, and it clearly says that there was no slaughter in the square. There were no mass shootings. There are lots of documents like this. The Australian consul also has documents like this. There was no massacre in Tiananmen Square. But the media will not correct their mistake. Even today, even last week, we could see repeated references to the Tiananmen Square massacre. We know it never happened, but we push the lie. Before I leave this subject, I just want to share one personal error that I made. In early 1990s, I had a friend who was in charge of the hunger program for the World Bank. And every time he flew into China, he would stop in Hong Kong, have dinner with me, and then move on to China. One day in 1993, he was flying out of China, and he said, "My job's done." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said that there was an anti-poverty campaign in China, and they were feeding the poor at a much faster rate than any UN project, any World Bank project. And he was a hunger expert. He had no idea how they'd achieve this, but they didn't need him anymore. He said, "This is fantastic." Now, I, like most journalists, was thinking, this can't possibly be true. The Chinese government are evil. they massacred people in Tiananmen Square with machine guns. I read it. I wrote about it myself. And so I refused to print his story. And of course, 5 or 6 years later, it emerged that everything he'd said was true. So, and I think that's the most important story of the decade. 800 million people lifted out of poverty. It's an amazing story. And I got it first, and I refused to print it. So that gives me the title of the world's worst journalist. Proof. I want to come almost up to date. Hong Kong journalism is still packed with hostile forces. Now, this is a man called Kong Chang-gun, who was the main voice of the Hong Kong Free Press for years. They pushed his stories. If you took a subscription to Hong Kong Free Press, you got his books, Mr. Kong's books. Mr. Kong, this is from one of his essays, "We were born in Hong Kong. We identify with Hong Kong. It is our place, our society." He was always on about he was a Hong Kong man and he represents Hong Kong. And he gave interviews to Time Magazine, The Guardian, The New York Times, The Washington Post, every major publication, the French media, the German media. He told everybody he spoke for the Hong Kong people because he was born there. He was a Hong Kong Chinese. Actually, he was a white guy in disguise, right? This is him, okay? So white guy pretending. Now, Hong Kong, yeah, even the name doesn't feel like a real Hong Kong name at all, does it? Hong Song Gan. Yeah. In 2019, this was revealed by me. In 2019, some Hong Kong people came to me and said, this guy is the loudest voice for the protesters, and he's a white guy pretending to be Hong Kong Chinese. This is evil. So I put it in my column, and you know what? The Hong Kong Free Press got a lawyer to write to me saying, all reference to this fact must be removed. We'll get you banned from the FCC. We'll get you banned from every journalistic organization around the world, International Journalists Federation, unless you remove all references for this. It was a very nasty, threatening letter. Anyway, did we remove the story? No, we didn't. And slowly it spread. And a group called the Grey Zone International Press picked it up, and it became public. And this guy, Brian, had to leave Hong Kong. What's he doing now? The same thing. He's in disguise. He's putting out.
Thai now.
Sorry?
Is he Thai now?
Yeah, yeah. He did appear in Thailand, I think, once, but he's mostly working UK and US now, but doing the same sort of thing. We've got pictures of him from the UK at the Hong Kong protest there. So we don't want you to know this, right? But Hong Kong journalism is infiltrated by these people. And then I'm just going to give you one or two more examples. Coming back up to date, the famous Hong Kong exodus. Right? Every newspaper in the world talks about the massive exodus of Hong Kong people after the NSL, the National Security Law, in 2020. In fact, if you look back, you find this article says that the record increase in applications for B&O were actually in 2019 during the protests. So that was before the National Security Law. The figures for 2020 are very low. The figures for 2021, after the British launched their free passports scheme, are very high. So in fact, the National Security Law is the low point. The media says that is what caused the output. The SCMP says that is what caused the rise in the exodus. It's not true. The rise in the exodus was caused first by the riots and second by the British passport scheme. And the figures are quite clear. You can go to the census department, which is very well organized by previous staff in that area, and look up the statistics yourself. Why is the NSL blamed? Because the NSL bans protests. We read that in the international press. We read that in the Hong Kong press. We read that in the South China Morning Post. The NSL bans protests. Has any journalist actually read the NSL? Well, I have. And guess what? There's one sentence that refers to protests. One. And you know what it says? We protect the right to protest. It says protest rights are protected. That's the only reference to protests in the entire national security law. So every media, South China Morning Post, international press, summarize it by saying it's a draconian law that bans protests. It isn't. So I don't think the SCMP, I mean, I've still got colleagues there, friends there. I think they're just lazy. I think they just haven't read the law. I don't think they're evil. There might be one or two intelligence people in there. I don't know, but I know that it's false. So one last thing is, of course, now we've got two separate strands of storytelling. So here's a popular social media guy from the US. I'm so deeply touched by the courage and passion of the Hong Kong protesters. And then we've got this talking about the BLM riots. So we've got these two different strands. We are judged differently. Now, here's the back cover of my book. Hong Kong civil unrest was the most reported news story of 2019, yet every salient detail presented was incorrect. And this is the most important part. The US has interfered in Hong Kong politics for years, yet Western media hides that fact. Every time I bring it up, I get accused of being paid 50 cents by the Chinese Communist Party. Where's my 50 cents? And I just want to emphasize, if you don't read the book, no problem, but I just read this one paragraph, which I'll give to you free. The media served the people of Hong Kong poorly, falsely splitting them into two opposing camps, one which they sanctified and one which they demonized. The truth is the majority of members of the Hong Kong public were at neither extreme. They're hardworking, balanced, intelligent, law-abiding people with an attitude to mainland China that is neither over-trustful nor irrationally hostile. I know because they send me tens of thousands of messages. Friday media, please log on. We have a big YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel has been going for 18 months, 2 million views already. Friday website, fridayeveryday.com. We've got millions of views of our articles and loads of great contributors. We need more contributors. So if anybody wants to contribute text, articles, videos, anything, we're happy to see you. And at the moment, we're not taking individual financial contributions because the business community has been really good. They've been financing us with regular grants. So if anybody's got a corporation or group which wants to be among our sponsors, very happy to hear from you. And of course, here's my personal email. So feel free to write to me anytime. Okay, thank you.
That is a great presentation. Thank you, Nury. Let me and share.
I think this is
sharing. Okay, so let's turn the stage to the audience and see if anybody would like to ask a question. I would encourage everybody to either raise your hand or put something in the chat, and we will then ask Nury to respond. Any question? Please, go ahead.
Thank you very much for that very informative presentation.
Would you like to come over here?
Sure.
Please.
Thank you very much, Nury, for that very informative presentation. I, like Philip, has also been following your work for a long time, entertained, humor, everything. And I haven't read all of your book, which I admit I've purchased. But one of the things that you shared very openly and honestly, is how your own thought process changed from being more anti-establishment through the 2014 protest to being, seeing things from a much different point of view post that period. And it's very similar to what I went through. I was looking at these people, our brothers and sisters, and seeing vent their frustration in that period. But then the people that supposedly were supposed to lead us to some sort of promised land of milk and honey and democracy just sat there, didn't do anything, just wanted to cause trouble. And I said, wait a minute, what's the game plan, guys? And there really never was one, other than just to kind of disrupt this from my point of view. So can you maybe share with us sort of your own thinking, evolution, how you went from being a lot more from what I perceive to have been more anti-establishment to being more pro or in line with the establishment now?
Yeah. I mean, it's not a journey of gradual change. It's really a sudden step in that, I discovered just how much manipulation there was. There's an entire industry. We nickname it the revolution industry. There's an entire group of organizations which work to stir up trouble. Everybody knows the NED, NED set up by the CIA, but there's others. There's a group called Canvas. There's the Oslo Freedom Foundation, which sounds like it should be in Oslo, right? Where's the Oslo Freedom Foundation? In New York. Okay. Where's the Radio Free Asia? In Washington. Right. There's all these groups. They're in the West. They work for the West. And once I realized just how much manipulation was going on, there's a group of they call them PsyOps, psychological operations officers. There's a group in UK and there's a group in US, both were involved in the Hong Kong protests. Once you realize just how manipulated this all is, then you can't defend it anymore. You can't say protesters are the good guys because they're being manipulated. Some of them just don't know they're being manipulated. Some of them do know. There's a lot of misdirection. And once I realized how many groups there were, I mean, I'll give you one shocking example. There's one group, they call themselves the Ghosts, PsyOps operation in the US. And they actually have a recruitment advertising campaign. And it shows protests around the world. It starts off with a reference to the Tiananmen Square massacre, which I mentioned earlier. And it has screenshots from other protests, including the Hong Kong 2019 protests. And it says, who's behind all this? You want to find out? Click here, and you click here, and you go to a US military recruitment site. So they're boasting about the fact that they are stirring up all this trouble. They're boasting about it. Yet I still can't get the international media to admit it's true. That's the problem we're facing. It's a huge one. So not a gradual change for me. It was just much of a sort of like, yeah, I've been fooled. Oh no. People say, oh, you're bribed by Beijing to take all this, but of course not. In fact, most of the people who write for Friday Every Day are not blue side. They're yellow side, like you and me, who've been moved towards the middle because we want the truth. We don't want to be pro-Beijing. We don't want to be pro-America. We just pro-truth, right?
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
There's another question, a couple of questions from the audience.
Okay.
Alexis Wong first, and then maybe Sam Wong. Alexis, would you turn on your microphone and perhaps you can ask Nury yourself? Or maybe I'll ask Nury on your behalf. Alexis, you're there? Well, okay. The question in the chat was Nury, how do we tell if Friday.com or Friday Every Day, I guess,
yeah, Friday Every Day,
is more independent and accurate simply because you say something about the 2019 riot is sweeter music to our ears? Can you give more examples on political manipulation in journalism in other areas and in other countries?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, first question, how do we tell if FridayEveryday.com is more accurate? You can't. I always say, do your own research. Don't trust any journalist, including me. Do not trust any of us. Don't trust me. So I usually end off my talks with read widely. You've got to read all the different things and then make up your mind yourself. I wrote a book for children on how to learn fact-checking. And one of the things I said is that listen to the tone of people over a period. And you can actually hear if someone's lying. You can actually hear if someone's trying to deceive you. I said, mothers and teachers all have this ability to know for telling lies, but all humans can develop this ability. So basically take a stance, Alexis, of healthy skepticism. It's good for all of us to be skepticism. So be skeptical about Friday, be skeptical about every media group as well. Your second question is, can you give examples of political manipulation in journalism in other countries, in other areas? Well, yes, I mean, there's loads. I won't mention Ukraine because that's, of course, a big, noisy, difficult thing. But I could mention UK as an example. So UK has a very, very draconian national security law they just introduced. One example is you're not allowed to approach the government headquarters, not allowed to approach it with a protest banner. And people who've tried that have been stopped. Okay, so these journalists from the UK who are suffering under this law, are they writing about it? No, they're writing that Hong Kong has such a law. You're not allowed to approach the Hong Kong government buildings, but it's not actually true. You are allowed to. So that's just an example, but there are many examples. The US also has very stern national security laws, much worse than ours. And I see I'm sitting next to the famous Sam.
Oh, wow. What an honor.
Okay. Oh, look, Nury,
Legend.
Thank you for the opportunity. And I also want to thank Lucy and Lawrence for the wonderful work creating this workshop. The Tannehill is actually known around the world among the Chinese diaspora, all the way from North America, some South America, Oceania, and Africa.
Whoa, well,
now, because I sent some of the footage back in Africa, my friend in Johannesburg, and also in Europe, of course. Now, therefore, I just want my best regard from Australia and all my friends over there, and best regard to Lucy, Lawrence, and all your colleagues here, and my senior great people to provide this opportunity. For yourself, now your speaker, in fact, I don't think people could question about your independence, about your honesty and transparency, because your book and you're here for the last many years in Hong Kong, your dedicated reporting to the truth, I'm talking about the truth, has been outstanding.
Oh, you're very good.
And therefore, in my opinion, you've done a wonderful job. As a Sri Lankan, I'm not sure what passport you're holding. You will make your country proud in Hong Kong and the rest of the world, because you are such an independent reporter. Before I actually ask your question, I must confess, Australia, the landscape for journalism is not much better in Hong Kong. They're only one-sided. China is black, the West is white, and Australia even better. That's the attitude of Australia and the West, which I think is horrifying. I'm also a part-time journalist. I've been doing it as a political correspondent and also a camera correspondent for the Australian National Government Special Broadcast Corporation in Cantonese.
Right.
And therefore, my English is very poor. But only time I could speak Cantonese is because of my section in political, parliamentary, and so on. And I had to keep my mouth shut. I could tell you now, I can't say neither way or the other. Therefore, I survived there as a non-paid broadcaster for 25 years. I have not one complaint. And that's how I survived. I could have worse gone to jail very quickly after I got over my mouth, honestly. Now, my question to you, I think you are a long-term citizens of Hong Kong now. I think it is. I think you're also a wonderful educator in the local university teaching journalism and so on. I just look for, from your point of view, my question is, how do you look up after this riot and all this terrible time with the Hong Kong student? Can you make your effort or anybody from your institution make Hong Kong young people better for the better future of Hong Kong and China?
Good question.
Yeah. Actually, I'm quite positive about the current young generation because I interview a lot of young people. I do a lot of school visits and university visits, and there's a certain age group which has really sucked up the what they call the human rights message, and they're very anti-China. But I visit schools and talk to the young people, and I say, what does China mean to you? You know what they say? Cool music, movies, cool apps, Douyin, TikTok, you know, what's the name of that singer? Lai. He's like, most adults never even heard of him. He's so big, you know, handsome young man, you know. And there's one of the singers, he does K-pop style music, and he's also youth ambassador for the Chinese Communist Party. Right, so K-pop star and Communist Party youth ambassador combines those jobs, and the very young people, they know that China to them doesn't mean some human rights problem. China to them means cool pop music and great gadgets, nice apps. So I have a lot of hope in that. They're not fooled by the mainstream media because they're not interested. They don't read the newspapers. Good. You don't support my industry. Good, because we're not doing a good job. So, so a lot of the Hong Kong young people are more culture focused than politically focused. One of the things about Asians, this is a generalization, which you may or may not agree with, is that in the West, people tend to over-politicize things. Gender, politics, everything is over-politicized. In Hong Kong, there's a strand of that as well. But Asia generally, we're less political. We're more interested in business and culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's going to be our salvation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can I make a small suggestion whether I politically agree or you agree with me? My observation for the last 5 years or beyond, a lot of Chinese students come from mainland China, studying overseas like Australia, America, United Kingdom. Now, interesting enough, the statistics prove that after graduation of those mainland Chinese students, over 6% now are returned to China for obvious reasons, because they felt if they stay on to not the motherland, they would not go as far or do better than the local. And also they have a struggle to find job because of the glass ceiling and so on. Now, I just wondering, would Hong Kong University or from the government take on some of these students from overseas? They could spend a little time in Hong Kong and also tell the Hong Kong young people their experience while in overseas and why they left America, Australia, and why they want to return to China, to demonstrate that the moon in the West is not as bright as what we talk about, just for your consideration.
It's a very good idea. Yes, we should definitely suggest it, and a very nice idea. Thanks very much.
Because I think a lot of the overseas mainland I talk to like to at least spend a bit of time in work in Hong Kong because of the international city and as well as the contact people like yourself. And thank you very much. Wonderful.
I have a question actually for Sam as well, mainly for Nury.
Okay.
You guys get death threats by being honest.
Yes.
How do you still keep your venom, so to speak? Why? What made you guys able to not back down afraid of death?
You go first. Larry, go first. No, not getting shot first. Your comment first.
Excuse me. you know, the first death threat you get is pretty scary, but after you get 100, it doesn't bother you anymore, because people like to bark. It's like dogs. Every dog likes to bark, but how many of them will bite you? You know, I've never been bitten by a dog. Have you?
I have. Not rabies.
Right.
Okay. Now, thanks for asking me the question. I probably a few Hong Kong, Chinese, Australian, and elsewhere put my real name, my background in Twitter for since 2019. Mine's still up there. But I got some other little additional qualification. I called myself as a humanitarian because I was a chair of the Red Cross in the national capital for 5 years. Red Cross. I'm one of the few Chinese actually be able to as a chair. And also I serve in Lions Club, many service club organizations in the world, around the world. But I put there specifically mentioned I'm not politically motivated. And my journalism, I never put it in. But yes, I have, during 2019 to 2021, I have received death threat probably about half a dozen daily. In fact, they know where to live. You know why? Because in Australia, I got my name, I live in Canberra, our electoral roll, the people voting are open. That means they know exactly where I live. I don't work anymore. Therefore, I should be frightened. But interesting enough that I talked to the police. I did talk to the police. I talked to security people, and they know how I stand about China and Hong Kong. But I'm an Australian. I need their advice. They say, Sam, don't worry about it. We know. And therefore, whether they know, meaning they look after me or something like that. But I do regularly in the past receiving funny phone calls. Some strange women in strange accents say you're dead. Something along those lines. Now, I could only say I only can live once. If I die because somebody assassinated me because what I believe, look, I'm happy to be the martyr. I only live so long. I could die. People will remember me. I'm go for Hong Kong and also for China. I could say only very few at that time in Twitter say the people protesting so-called are terrorists. The reason for that, they actually go to harm people and dig up infrastructure and threaten people. Therefore, because of that, that's how I receive all my compliments. And thank you again. I'm still surviving here today. And thank you for your support.
Thank you. Well, I hope Nury and Sam as well, I hope you guys live a long, happy, and healthy life. Next question by Anne Poe to Nury. Curious why the quote-unquote true story of the 1989 June 4th incident is not told simply with proof and facts to set the record straight, for example, by the PRC, who got misunderstood for so many years.
Yes, it's a good question. I mean, the PRC is not very skilled with telling their story, but they are getting better. They're getting better every year. And they have some very good presenters now. There's several websites which do tell the correct story. There's quite a detailed account in FridayEveryday.com of what really happened during the Tiananmen Square weekend. There's some very good other stories. There's a very good book called Atrocity Fabrications, published recently by a very good London University scholar. And because it's a white guy from the West, you know, people take it seriously. And he's got a chapter on Tiananmen Square. He's got a chapter on the Uyghur scandals. And it explains very clearly with lots of clear references about what really happened in Tiananmen Square, what really happened with the Uyghurs, showing how the mainstream media version is completely false and the real story is completely different. So there are versions out there. It's just that the mainstream media, the dominant media, which is Reuters, AFP, AP, BBC, CNN, Fox, they won't take that story because they are pushing the Western narrative. And they're not pushing the truth, they're pushing the Western narrative. Unfortunately, the top 10 biggest media in the world, in fact, probably the top 20, would all be from the West. Remember, the West is 13% of the world's population. And so they dominate 100% of the world's media. All the international news in the Straits Times and the the SCMP and so on, it comes from Reuters and so on. So these Western media organizations with their Western bias are filling the international news pages of all the newspapers around the world. It's a huge problem. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question from, yeah, please go ahead. Come in.
Yeah, thank you, Nury. You have been doing a very good job giving a very good briefing now. We all know that all media are controlled by corporations, governments, like RFA, like Russia Today, or for Chinese press, like by the Central Propaganda Department. So every media has its own axe to grind, its own private agenda. So now, as a lay person, we receive all the information, all disinformation, serving to mislead, serving to cheat, whatever. So the wisdom is ask no questions and hear no lies. Right. So now, as a lay person, can you, as a seasoned professional journalist, give us some tricks? How do we protect ourselves from seeing through the truth behind the information that is fed to us?
Yeah.
Or we just shut our mouth, shut our ear, and so we get a clean, pure mind.
I think both of those things. Excuse me. I think don't let yourself be angry. Don't let yourself be fooled. Excuse me. I think don't read the newspapers is one way of doing it. But if you do read the newspapers or read the media, read widely so you get different points of view. Sorry, I've got that. Oh. All right, that's better. Yeah, so so read widely and look out for what I call the Western lens. Like, for example, at the moment, Taiwan is a big issue, and in the SCMP last week, it said there's China, US tension, China is threatening Taiwan, and so on. But in fact, if we read widely, we find actually that the Chinese policy on Taiwan was set by Deng Xiaoping. And what he said was, we will wait. We will wait whether it takes 100 years or 1,000 years. That was the policy. We will wait for Taiwan. Now, what the media is reporting is their deadline is approaching. The Chinese will take over within 3 years, within 4 years, within 6 years. And in fact, if you look back 20 years, you'll find the media is saying the same thing, giving deadlines. So you've got to read widely and realize that, okay, that's not what Deng Xiaoping said. He said he'd wait 100 years or 1,000 years. So if you're going to read the media, read widely. If you don't want the stress, just cancel your media subscriptions and go with your own instinct. Talk to people. If you want to find out about something, call an expert. So yes, one thing is that there's people who use social media a lot get angry, get upset, and that I think doesn't help. So I think instead of fighting back, instead of getting into political arguments, just stay out of the political arguments. One of the things we do at Friday is not respond to things, or if we do respond in a humorous way.
Thank you. Thank you, Leung, for asking the question. And the next one, W.S. Chan.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Now, you have enlightened us a lot. There is a blatant lie that happened every year in the past 20 so years. It's about the number of people participating in the July 1st march. Now, 2 weeks later, we'll have another speaker coming, who was a Hong Kong U professor. In 2004, he used a scientific method to estimate the number of people taking part in the march. The organizer claimed there were 530 million thousand people.
Yeah.
And his method came up with just 120,000, which is a great contrast. So, but I think many Hong Kong people just take for granted, just accept what the organizer claim figures. How can we now, if we look at the television screen, we know there can be 500,000. But many people accept it. So how can we talk to our friends and other people how to find out the truth? What are the right number?
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, I've got a whole chapter about this subject in my book. Don't believe the organizers of any protest. One funny way I did was we calculated how long the queue of people would be if there were 10 people abreast for 2 million people, as claimed for June the 16th, and it would go all the way to Guangzhou, from Hong Kong to Guangzhou across the water, and obviously it wasn't that long. So it's absurd. So some healthy skepticism, I think, is necessary. Sorry, it's not a good time to lose my voice. It's middle of the speech. Yeah.
Take it easy.
So be very skeptical. A bit of healthy, there's a difference between being skeptical and being cynical. If you're being cynical, it's sort of like you don't believe anything is true and it turns you into a sour person. But being skeptical is different. Being skeptical is sort of like, well, okay, I won't accept that until I've seen the proof. And I think being skeptical is good. Being cynical is bad. So let's be a little bit skeptical, saying, well, you say 2 million people, maybe it's not true. Have a little bit of healthy skepticism.
Yeah, thank you. One more question. Now, I think you talked about, or you heard about the Oslo camp.
Yeah.
Now, Joshua Wong and many other young Hong Kong people have been to that Oslo camp for democracy training, so-called. And some of them were sent to India to see Dalai Lama for some philosophical teaching. Are all these activities organized?
Yes.
Related?
Yeah. There's a group I mentioned earlier. We call it the revolution industry. And there are certain groups which organize all this stuff. They have certain books. We know who they are. It started off with a man called Gene Sharp. Gene Sharp in the 1980s. He announced himself as the leader of non-violent protest around the world, but really a lot of his stuff was turned into violent protest. He arrived in Beijing in 1989, just before June the 4th. Okay, the other guy who arrived before that date was the head of the CIA. Okay, guy in charge of spiriting people out of countries. So they manipulated the whole June the 4th story, and their organizations grew and grew and grew. And there are now 18 intelligence agencies just in the US. 18. There's one called Signal Reduction, which is bigger than the CIA, more staff than the CIA. People aren't aware of the power of these guys. They're everywhere. Revolution consultancies, they've got people, they've got this scheme, we call it the circle of pain around China. So they can't penetrate China itself very well. So the circle of pain is Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong, Taiwan. And then the latest one is Mongolia. So perfect circle around China, all to cause trouble and all with the same message. The message is the Chinese are evil. Look how they treat their own people. And they have to use that message because China inconveniently doesn't invade other countries. So they can't use the invasion angle like they do with Russia. So they have to put, look how badly they treat their own people. So they tried to launch the Mongolia project a couple of years ago, but it flopped. So they're going to try again soon. So yeah, revolution industries, terrible people stirring up trouble everywhere. And unfortunately, they're quite good at it. But fortunately, people these days are quite skeptical. I mean, let me give you some good news, right? The US ambassador to Beijing recently posted, he does all sorts of terrible posts on social media, but he posted something saying, I'm in a prison in China where a brave US airman was tortured to death. Let us remember the brave soldier, you know. So he posted this, right? And then someone wrote a correction saying, wait, you need to explain that that part of China was Japanese. And it was the Japanese who tortured him to death, not the Chinese. The way you wrote it makes it look like the Chinese tortured him to death. And then someone else logged in saying, you're deliberately misleading people. And then 100 people around the world added social media posts saying, this is what the US does. You're misleading the world. He didn't correct his post, but the public corrected it for him. I stopped reading after 100 posts, but nearly all of them told the truth. He told a lie. He misled people. Everyone else told the truth. So there's hope. There's hope. The public is fixing the lies told by people who are deliberately causing trouble. So that's got to be a good thing, right?
Well, in relation to this question, which WF just asked, Alexis Wong just asked a related question, which is, what do you think, Nury, what do you think about artificial intelligence, which is mainly trained on the data sets based on the news and the Western media, which are so lazy and biased. So what would come of this since AI is mainly trained on these fake, biased, or partial information?
Yeah. Yes, on the surface, it looks like very bad news. But I think we can take comfort in the numbers. As I say, the West is very loud, very dominant, but it's 13% of humanity. The rest of the world is 87% of humanity. And the biggest data sets in the world is the one owned by the Chinese government. They have the biggest data set for human behavior, for language. The second biggest will be the Indian government. They're also collecting data sets. The biggest data sets in the world in a few years' time will be China, India, and Africa. The Western data set will be tiny, relatively. So even though they're big and loud and powerful now, I think in the long run, the numbers are on our side. Humanity is already today, humanity is 76% Asian and African. If we add in the other parts, we've got 87% of humanity is not the West. So it's hard at the moment, but in the long run, the numbers are on our side.
Okay. Sam has another question.
I've got a quick comment, if I may. You talk about AI. Yesterday, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom just had to decide whether there is an international or world summit on AI. The first country, obviously, is the United States. The second is China, and then you move on to the United Kingdom. But he hasn't made up his mind whether he should invite China because of current geopolitics. Now, this is something you might like to follow up. You talk about scientific and technological things, you still have to worry about geopolitics. The comment I'd like to make after you talk about the Norwegian situation, every 5 years, this camp, and they have recruited many young people, bright young people from Australia to attend this special youth camp. We have a whole string of youth become politicians, either become the Liberal Party candidate or become the Labour Party. They all come from the Norwegian. If I could make my last report about Norway, is, as you probably know, among the Nobel laureate, Norway is the only country dominated the Peace Prize. The Peace Prize. All the other prizes are Sweden's. Now, therefore, if you look at the past 25 years, not beyond, you can see who are the awardees, the people who receive Nobel laureate in Peace Prize. You will know, damn well know, that how this allocation of the Nobel laureate to what people, who are the people, and what are they for. I could tell you that nobody, I could tell you from China, from Soviet or whatever places, anybody have slightly non-democratic background, you won't consider. Now, therefore, I'm sorry to tell you that this Nobel Peace Prize used to be one of the most prestigious thing on earth for any scholar and any humanity promotion people. But because of this, the whole thing vanished to a degree that people no expectations to this thing. What a shame. And thank you for your thought.
All right. Anyone else like to ask a question? Yes, please go ahead. Come here.
Nury, I wish I could be as optimistic as you, but unfortunately, not. And I point to a few things. I oftentimes watch replays of the national news of Canada on YouTube just because I'm homesick. Now I can say that watching that just makes me sick of Canada. Of Canada. If you watch the news, the first 2 or 3 leading stories, this is the national news of Canada, are about how evil the Chinese is. Okay, they're either evil in that they're trying to influence the outcome of Canadian elections by donating 200,000 Canadian dollars, or some Chinese Canadian MP has been compromised, or something of that sort. Or they're evil for, passing in front of a US ship outside of Chinese waters, or, close international waters closest to China. So that's the one thing. And if I watch something like Australian 60 Minutes, I'd almost think that China and Australia were at war with each other. I mean, it's just like, how did this happen? And it just seemed to happen gradually over the course of the last 5 to 8 years. But I look at it and I think, my God, how is it going to be undone? And then if I take this with the question asked earlier, I think by Alexis, about if AI is just taking what's available in that and feeding it in, then whatever AI kind of develops is also going to be very anti-China AI. For any sort of neutral observer trying to learn about the Earth, some alien came to Earth and tried to learn about us through AI, you think China was the evil empire. Whereas it's, it's definitely not the case.
But the thing is that AI is creating skepticism, which I think is good, because you see pictures. There was one this morning of Donald Trump hugging Fauci, and everyone was saying, this is fake, and there's lots of skepticism is growing up about the news, about what you see, and now there's a whole range of AI videos. So there'll be an increase in skepticism around the world, which I think is good, because at the moment the dominant narrative is a fake one, and so if people become skeptical about the dominant narrative, then people will have to think for themselves. They'll have to go by their evidence. They'll have to think, wait, I've got Chinese friends. Are they really this evil? Wait, I've been to Hong Kong. Is it really dead? So they'll have to start doing their own thinking, which I think is got to be a good thing. And remember, Canada, yes, I agree with you. I've read the Canadian news as well, the Australian news, but what percent of the world is Canada? Less than 1%?
It's not, but it's hitting home directly because when I go home and I'm talking to people, and they really think, and if I show them, hey, this is my Uyghur cotton shirt that I bought in Hong Kong, they're thinking like I'm somehow being a Nazi for sure. They really buy into this, the fact that there's 1 million Uyghurs under lock and key in China, whereas in fact the most incarcerated country in the world is the United States. That's an open fact. But somehow there's these mysterious camps that are holding 1 million people in Xinjiang.
Well, I mean, again, let me try and be encouraging. They relaunched the Uyghur campaign recently, but this time focusing on the Hui Muslims, saying the second biggest group in China is being persecuted, the Hui Muslims, 11 million of them. And they relaunched it about a few weeks ago, based on the same RFA, the same CHRD, the same outfits. And guess what? None of the media picked it up. None of the media picked it up, because the media is starting to think, wait, we're making fools of ourselves with these concentration camps that don't exist. So nobody picked it up. They relaunched it end of March. Again, the same campaign with gay people. Gay people are being put into re-education camps in China. There was a series of articles on that. Nobody picked it up. One newspaper published the 3 articles and then deleted them. So the latest hate campaigns against the Chinese are actually failing. So I can give you a link to a video where I summarize how they're starting to flop. So again, that's good. If they're starting to flop, then the truth has a chance of emerging. So yeah, so I think journalists are not necessarily, we're not all evil people. So there are definitely some evil ones, but we don't want to embarrass ourselves. If we relaunch the concentration camp stories again and it just makes us look foolish, then we'll just skip it.
Well, thanks. Very nice. So, I wonder if anybody else have any comment or questions. If not, then we will ask Lucy to say a few words. And
I ask a question.
Oh, you have a question? Okay, please, Lucy. Lucy, go ahead.
I would like to ask Nury. Firstly, you are probably the old school of journalists. Well trained and have a lot of practical experiences. But in this era of social media, then everybody can be like a blogger. You can have you can make noise, and I was wondering, like the guy who from the white guy from Amnesty International posed as a Chinese national, all this kind of fake media. And I wonder also whether you know about how they train students at the Hong Kong's schools of journalism. They are quite several. I'm sure they're almost every university here has a department of journalism. Yeah. So how good it is, and then how's the situation with the social media when it's so rampant and everybody can be like a writer?
Yeah. Actually, there's 2 schools of journalism in Hong Kong. I think Baptist University and Hong Kong University. And Hong Kong University one is very American, unfortunately. American teachers, American lecturers, American principals. So that's a problem. I think the Baptist University one is more Asian. So so there's more hope there. But your point about the bloggers is very interesting, of course, because of course thousands of voices is good, because also the thing about TikTok and that style of blogging is it's light, funny, humorous. It's real. It's human, and that's got to be a good thing. People making jokes, and it's forcing people to see. Okay, look, here are 20,000 Chinese people on TikTok being funny and human. That's good. There was a viral video last year of police officers in China playing pranks on each other. It was great because the pranks were very funny. And it made you think, wait, police officers in China, they're good, funny human beings. They're not monsters. And this sort of thing is fantastic. So I'm a great fan of that type of social media. I once interviewed a very famous actor from the West. And he said the most powerful moment in his life was when he was playing a powerful emperor. And he was on top of a building being the emperor. And the crowd started laughing at him. That was in the script. And he said to have 1,000 people laughing at you like this, he said he just felt himself shrinking and shrinking. And I was thinking, ooh, the power of laughter. That's good. So So instead of getting into political fights, what we do is we make 1,000 TikToks. We go on YouTube, we go on Facebook and Instagram, and we say, look, we live in Hong Kong. It's a funny, crazy, great place full of wonderful people having fun. This is Hong Kong. Look at it. It's so cool. And good-hearted, funny, human videos,
Okay.
I think will help. Yeah.
Okay. Now, following on the front, of course, we would like to have more interactions, exchanges through the world. I was told that now that like Hong Kong is placed in category 4 of alert by the Canadian government. So meaning that the students, if they exchange students, you know, you have Canadian students coming to Hong Kong University, and then barring this exchange. Because you are, you know, some students, some people think that Hong Kong may not be safe. You may be shipped to China, right? So, and all these misconceptions and this done by like a country regime. So this is something worrying. And so I don't know whether you have an answer for it. The other thing I want to ask you, well, you are a reputable journalist. Do they accept your articles? You know, some of traditional Western media, do they accept your articles? Do you write to them? You know, for example, I read certain like the more influential Financial Times, for example. We have a copy here. And I think that they are, you know, they are like 90% are like the traditional Western view, but then like 10% are every now and then they are like more liberal-minded ones. So do they accept articles from, say, from yourself?
Occasionally, but I think one opportunity we can all use, if you're good at arguments or writing, is to write to the letters page. Letters page of FT, for example, often has pro-China stuff because the readers are pro-China. Same with all the big media, New York Times, Washington Post, Times of London, they all have letters pages. Yeah, so if you write a short, clever article saying, you know, you say this about China, but here's the truth, and you put it in a, you know, interesting way, they'll often print it. So in that sense, we will have access to it. So that's the good side. On the bad side, you know, there have been occasions where me and people like me have taken journalists from Reuters and shown them the truth. And so, this is the truth. Will you print it? And they've gone back to their office, and then they've called us saying, we're not allowed to print that, you know. So there is big power. Reuters is financed by, you know, NATO governments. BBC is financed by NATO governments. AFP financed by NATO governments. So we've got no hope with these big guys. But again, you know, the locusts are big, but there are a lot of us ants. There are more ants than there are locusts. So let the locusts be big and loud. The ants are more numerous. So that gives me hope. You know, we've got numbers on our side. I don't know if you've seen the movie Bug's Life, but they've got the big, strong grasshoppers, and they get defeated by the ants because there are so many ants. You know, so we are the ants. We will win.
Okay.
Thank you, Lucy, for the question. There's another question from the online audience. And the question is, would like to ask Nury, since the Hong Kong media is full of partial truth and fake news and outright lies, what should, if anything, the government do about it?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question, because like if the government, whatever the government does, the international media says, oh, the government is so evil, they're communists, look, they're ruining Hong Kong. So whatever they do. But my suggestion, I've put this in print a couple of times, is that what you do is you take the Western fake news law, one from US or UK, and then take it word for word, and pass it in Hong Kong. So then they can't say, look what the evil Hong Kong government are doing. They say, oh, Western law, look, we cut and paste put it in. I mean, the Hong Kong government has done that occasionally. The Hong Kong extradition law was actually cut and paste from a UN extradition law. So yeah, if the Hong Kong government does fake news law, they should cut and paste it from a Western law. That way, you immediately defeat the critics who will say this is proof that Hong Kong is an evil place run by evil people. But at the moment, the Hong Kong government is treading quite carefully and is not moving ahead with that. I suggest they wait until one of the Western countries pushes ahead with their fake news law, and then just copy it, saying, "An idea. Let's copy the Western one."
Well, I seriously, I like your suggestion that we should read very widely, and in my words, we triangulate and know what the actual. But I still like humor. I miss the Lai See columns a lot. With that, perhaps we should conclude the presentation, and I would like to ask W.S. Chan now to have a 名片預告。Please go ahead.
節目預告啊！節目預告之前咧，再多謝阿 Nury 係嘛，咁啊好精彩嘅。
要轉台啊！From Pearl to Jade。
下個禮拜六就係就係講個題目咧，就叫 Web 3.0，就請咗個叫 Emo Chan 一個 FinTech 嘅專家，亦都係喺好多大學處任教過嘅。係一個叫 Lawrence 豬嚟到幫我哋講關於 Web 3.0嘅。再下個禮拜六咧，就係請咗白景崇教授，香港大學嘅Don Bacon Song， 就係講如何利用政府嘅數據咧嚟到進行 social innovation。佢其實最近有一個大嘅 seminar 嘅，就講關於嗰啲 open data 咧。即係點樣可以利用啲 open data 咧嚟到進行社會改良啊、改革啊、創新啊咁樣嘅。咁就白教授咧，其實喺對香港政府好多政策啊、人口政策啊、各方面咧都好有研究嘅。佢講即係咁多年嚟，佢點樣可以利用呢啲 data 嚟到幫助到譬如一啲住嗰啲劏房嗰啲咁嘅居民啊，深水埗啲居民啊咁樣，咁啊應該都即係好有啟發性嘅。咁請你哋多啲介紹你啲朋友嚟參加啊！唔該晒。
好 ，Thank you. We will end the Zoom session. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you Nury for being our guest.